नमस्कार दर्शकबिन, सदा चाहिँ यहाँहरूको निम्ति हामीले कार्यक्रम हेलो अमेरिकामा स्पेशल गेस्ट लिएर उपस्थित भइसकेका छौँ। स्पेशल गेस्टहरूसँग हामी समसामयिक विषयमा भलाकुसारी गर्नेछौँ। उहाँ हुनुहुन्छ राजनीतिज्ञ, लयर पनि हुनुहुन्छ, शेखर कृष्णन। It's really great to have you on, sir.
Thank you so much for having me too, and such a great program too. I'm a big fan and supporter, so it's my honor to be here too.
All right. So how's everything going on?
Everything is good. We've hit the ground running. We've been very busy. We started in January. I was appointed chair of the committee for parks in our city, so overseeing all of our city's parks and really fighting to make sure that communities like ours here in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst have much more green space, park space for our children, for our families to come together. We have some of the least amount of parks in all of New York City, so it's my priority to make sure that we have more for our community, more resources for our immigrant communities, more resources for our Nepali community. This is, I believe, the responsibility of city government coming out of the pandemic.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, that's a great news as well. And then you were talking about the budget funding about Elmhurst Hospital too, right? So what about was that? Can you tell something about it?
Yeah, so Elmhurst Hospital is our public safety net hospital right here. It serves over 1 million people, especially our immigrant communities, but it has less than 1 bed for every 1,000 patients that come through its doors. It gets less in public funding than any private healthcare facility. That's unacceptable and it's unjust. And so one of my biggest priorities is to make sure that we get more funding from our city government for Elmhurst Hospital. It is such an excellent hospital just a few blocks away from here. Our city must support it, especially after we saw after the pandemic where it was the epicenter of the pandemic.
I got you. Yeah. Once again, I would like to very congratulations you winning this race. You know, the race was so tough between you, Andy Chan, and Caroline Tran, right? So how was your experience about that? We're going to start from there.
Sure. I'm so proud and honored to be in this position too, and it's history making. I'm one of the first South Asians ever elected to the city council in the history of New York City, which means our communities finally have a voice now and representation in government, where when decisions are being made, our communities now are in the room to make sure that we're getting services from the city that are responsive to us. And that's the message that I always ran with during the campaign. It's such a broad coalition of support. And it was because our message really was as inclusive as possible to make sure that we were bringing all communities together to make sure that we have a future for our city where we are prioritized.
Okay. Yeah, I have had last time I've had a guy, Brian Well. He was an attorney, lawyer, and he worked for government as well. So you're also, I checked your background as well. You're a lawyer, you're an attorney, at the same time politics, right? So what is the connection? I mean, between that, why you're a lawyer and you politician, right? So what is the connection, like why?
So before going into politics, I was a civil rights lawyer, and I was representing tenants who are facing eviction or discrimination. And I saw the way in which we have all of these laws on paper that protect tenants, but in reality, they're not enforced that way. So many people, they may not know what their rights are, or whatever laws protect them, they may not know them. And I think that that is the perspective I have as a lawyer in government now, is that it doesn't matter what programs or resources we have. If they're not in our languages, if they're not in Nepali, if they're not in Hindi or Bangla, they're never going to reach our communities. And so that's one of the reasons why I decided to run for office, was to say the work doesn't end just when we pass a law. No, that's where it begins. We have to make sure that it's being communicated and translated to our communities, so we're actually getting the benefits of those resources here in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst.
I guess, yeah. That's what I'm asking for. In America, like most of the lawyers, they come to the political field, So I think it's a good idea, right? Because a lot of law and rules and regulations and everything,
right, yeah.
And then jump to the politics, right? It's I mean, much easier or helpful, right?
It definitely helps you know or think about what the purpose of the laws are, whether they're actually being enforced to protect people's rights or not, and what the limits of the laws are too. So I bring all of that different perspective, but the most important one being, well, there's this big gap between what the laws say on paper and how they can help people in reality. And so that I've seen through my work as a lawyer, and that's what I'm also trying to focus on right now too.
Okay, so you're a civil rights lawyer, right?
Exactly.
Why civil rights lawyer?
So, I think for us, coming from a family where my parents came here from India, growing up and seeing the way they were also discriminated against because of the color of their skin, because of where they came from, seeing so many of my clients who came across the border with far, far less even, who didn't have papers, didn't have status, and how much discrimination they faced as my clients from landlords who were harassing them, who were trying to force them out, made me realize that I wanted to be committed to the work of civil rights work, to make sure our immigrant neighborhoods and communities are protected from all the kinds of discrimination and injustice that are out there. That's what motivated me to go to law school and focus on civil rights work, and it's really what motivates me now too to keep doing the work that I'm doing in government too. Okay,
so 30 years before, your parents come from Kerala, India to here, right? So you're born and raised in here, right?
Yep, exactly.
So the thing your parents faced the discrimination 30 years before, right? So what about right now? I mean, it's a little better than before, or of course better than before, right? So what are the different?
Well, I don't think that it's better than before. I think the discrimination continues in so many different ways. We see the way our, for example, taxi workers who are here for 2 decades, they were being victims of predatory lending. The city also issuing loans or helping get loans issued that were at high interest rates where they faced foreclosure and bankruptcy, and how much we had to fight. And I was proud to join so many taxi workers this fall to fight to get city government to help our drivers. That was a fight that we shouldn't have had to do at this point in time too, but it took us so much energy, and we marched with them at City Hall. Several of our electeds and myself, we got arrested in an act of civil disobedience too. You see the way in which during COVID, it was our communities, the data on our South Asian communities about how COVID affected us, what was the mortality rate, hasn't been studied either. And so many of our small business owners from the South Asian community too aren't getting resources from the city as well. So in many ways, the discrimination continues in so many different forms, and especially if you're here and you're struggling to make it by, whether it's you're a small business owner or you're a taxi worker, the discrimination is even worse in many ways. So there's much work to be done.
Yeah, I was trying to come on that point also. Last time I've been talking with Jessica Ramos as well about the taxi workers, like TLC drivers problem, you know what I mean? And this is the really serious issue. Our people, they buy a taxi like $70,000-$80,000, right? And they put on TLC, and they drive 5,000, 6,000 rides successfully. But one ride they do hard brake or some little mistake, right? And the private company, Uber, Lyft, Via, they deactivate them. I mean, they did 10,000 rides successfully, and 1 or 2 hard brake, the customer complains, and the private company, they deactivate them easily, So do you guys think is that important? Because all the people, they support you behind your campaign or everything, they're the taxi workers, because they make little good money than others, and they have a free time, right? So do you guys ever think about the deactivation issue of the private company?
I think we think of all the issues to see the way in which our drivers are facing so many injustices in different ways, whether it's from a basic level where they are not able to they're the victims of predatory lending schemes, and they're deep in debt too, and the medallion values have gone down.
That was the first one.
Exactly. To beyond that too, the way that the TLC can have very, very strict standards and put them in very difficult spots when it comes to their license or their ability to drive a taxi or a for-hire vehicle driver, to the way in which making sure that all of our for-hire vehicle drivers also have health insurance and have rights as employees and aren't classified as independent contractors in a way where they don't have these benefits too. These are all the things that are on my mind. They're all the things affecting our communities in particular too. And so we have to make sure that we change those things.
Yeah, last time we did a little campaign with IDZ, one of the one of the taxi worker company, and we call by our 2 hours notice on Facebook. If you are deactivated, come here at Sumnima Kitchen, one of the Nepali restaurant. there were 400 people.
Wow.
And then I've heard them. Some people, you know, I spend like 60,000, 70,000 per night buying taxi, and then Uber deactivate me. It's hard to, you know, I'm working on store now and hard to take care of my family and then mortgage of taxi, you know. So they should think about that. Lyft and Uber, they're definitely making money, but they should think about the drivers.
And I think that's what needs to be changed, is that Lyft and Uber and companies like that are making so much money at the expense of our drivers. We have to be fighting for our drivers and making sure some of these policies, many of them, change so they're actually protecting our drivers, not making it more difficult for them while these companies profit in the meantime. So I mean, higher level, you know, like higher income people, they're happy, or they're, you know, they're doing whatever they want to do in America. You know, the lower people always there. You know what I mean? Exactly.
So you guys have to be a breeze about, you know, of that as well. So I mean, another things is in my mind. I have a Citizen app called a Citizen. I download that on my phone. Like every hour, you know, it popped up, you know, like knife stabbing or robbery or killing or gunshot, especially our Elmhurst and Jackson Heights area. So do you guys think about anything to protect about that as well?
Well, I always say everyone has to feel safe in our communities, whether you're walking down the street, taking the train, free from hate crimes, safe from hate crimes too, which is a big issue affecting our Asian American communities. And we have to do much more as a city to invest in the services that keep our communities safe too. And that's what I think we need to be doing and really prioritizing as well. What are strategies that will truly keep us safe too? So for example, with our youth, one of my big issues is to fight to bring a community center to our neighborhood, a place where our youth can come together, can engage in positive and constructive ways so they're not distracted by other things too. These are ways that we need to think about and supporting organizations that are doing a lot of mental health work and working with our homeless too. We have to really think about what are the strategies that truly keep our community safe and work to make everyone feel safer too.
Yeah, it's so important. And I was talking about some Chinese leader during the election time in Chinatown. They said they have a volunteer security. You know what I mean? The government, they have a one security, that's fine in different level, police or NYPD, you know, everything. But they said in a Chinatown, Chinese area, they said that's what they've been doing like a little longer. They have a volunteer Chinese security as well, internal, you know what I mean? So this is one of the good idea to, you know, keep our community safer.
I think one of the things that we need is to really focus on long-term investments to keep our communities safer too. So what are the strategies that make people feel safer? Part of it also is investing in our communities in ways that we have resources we've never had. If we actually had more investments in our mental health services, in our hospital system, in our healthcare, in basic things like, you know, more sanitation pickups in our neighborhood to more lighting in our neighborhoods too. They're all different things to a community center, as I mentioned before. We have to see addressing these things as not short-term solutions, but what are long-term ways to lift up our communities and to make everyone feel safer in our communities too.
Of course, yeah. And then if you like, that was the thing. If you remember correctly, I mean, like as I said earlier, it's been 30 years or longer, you know. What are the discrimination, you know, that your parents faced and then they told you about, like, you know, these are the major things?
Yeah, I mean, they faced someone, and I would witness it too, you know, always not feeling exactly like they belonged here in the way they were treated. You know, my father at one point bouncing from job to job, and one of them he was fired from because the boss was afraid that a foreigner would take his position. To my mother, who, you know, and she worked in the sciences too, would do so much work around research for powerful medicines and drugs too, but never got the recognition for the work that she did. I would always be taken away from her and given to someone else too. And these are the kinds of things that so many immigrants face every single day, where they're invisibilized, they're disrespected simply because of where they came from or the color of their skin or their accent. And I think that's always stayed with me, and it made me feel committed to, this is the work that I need to do from civil rights work in our government to make sure that we're always fighting, and I'm always fighting for our communities, to make sure those kinds of things end. We need to be respected, we need to be seen, as South Asian American communities too, and our issues need to be heard as well. When we demand things in our languages, for example, we need to get those resources from government in our languages. When we fight for the rights of our workers or our tenants or our small business owners, we need to be respected too. And a lot of times what happens is our voices simply are not heard.
Oh yeah, yeah, and then at the same time, ways on unemployment, rates fact, and of course homeless stuff. Like
there's
a
so
lot
much
of things.
more.
Yeah, a lot of things.
So much more in services the city can provide too. Which
So yeah, I would check in your biography. You born in 1986, right?
85.
85,
Yeah.
right?
Unfortunately, one more year have to give you.
So you're too young. You got a long way to go, and you got much more to do. You just debut in politics, right? You just started. So, what about your next further politics?
Right now, I think I'm loving and really feeling grateful to be in this position. So I don't think about all those other things for the future too. I think about every day, how can we do more for our community to make sure our voices are heard? And we've, every day there's new challenges that come up, new issues to work on. But what I feel grateful for and lucky is to represent such a beautiful community like our Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, where we have so many communities from around the world who are here. And it was our communities who are the most essential workers of the city, our delivery workers, our taxi workers.
Everything.
Exactly, our healthcare workers. To be able to fight for this community every single day is something that always I feel so thankful for. And I wake up every morning thinking to myself, how can I fight the best that I can to make sure the voices of the most vulnerable in our communities are especially heard?
Yeah, so this is you just enter in city council member, and it's supposed to be a 4 years time, right? But they said this is a 2 years. What is that? What is that?
So because of the census and redistricting, this term is a shorter term. So there's.
So you're gonna fight for the same position after 2 years again.
Exactly.
You start campaign and everything.
Yes,
again. Exactly same way.
Same way. Yep.
And then for how long? 2 years or 4 years?
So it's 2 year, and then 4 years. So total is the same thing, where it's like you get potentially 8 years in total, but as opposed to being 4 and 4, it's 2, 2, 4.
Oh, 2, 2, 4.
Yes.
Oh,
exactly.
so normally it has to be 2 elections, but now it's going to be 3 elections.
It's going to be 3 elections.
That's it, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. And how is the response from our obviously South Asian community? They make you win, but how is the specifically Nepali community supporting you? How is it?
The Nepalese community has been so supportive through the campaign and now too. What I felt very grateful for, I was just at a Losar celebration just a few weeks ago too, and just to see the way in which everyone has felt both so proud to have our office there too, and me in the city council position, and excitement about the work that we can do together. Our Nepali community from the beginning has been so supportive, and I'm excited to continue building such close ties with the Nepalese community because it is one of the most the fastest growing and most powerful immigrant communities in our neighborhood too, and in our city, that I just feel so lucky to be able to fight for as well.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't have exactly data, but it's per leaders saying we're 40 to 50,000 Nepali living in New York. So now I got next questions is they just passed they just were voting for our city, our vote, right? They just passed that, right? Do they write it down on policy already or no?
So it's been passed.
When is that going to be applicable?
By the next election.
Exactly.
So next year, the next election.
That's cool.
Yep, and which is great because there were so many people I remember who came up to me too during the election and said, "We wish we could vote for you, but we can't." And I said, "Well, I'm going to fight to make sure that you can." And so I'm so proud that this legislation has passed because there's so many in our community, like I said, who are most essential workers, whose voices aren't part of the political process, and now they can be. And I think that is so important to make sure that our government is always staying responsive to our communities.
I know. I mean, they're taking money from us, like we pay tax, right? So money works. Why doesn't our opinion work, or why our vote works, right? That's what I was point.
That's a great question. Is our voices should count too, just the same way as others' voices count as well.
Yeah. If our money count, if our money count, our voice also count, has to be count, right?
And it's that is also the amount of sacrifices that our immigrant communities make every single day. How essential they were during this pandemic. All of those reasons, our immigrant communities have sacrificed and given so much for our city. It's time that their voices are recognized too, and they have a say in the political process and who represents them.
Okay, and you're from Democrats, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some certain of people, some people think like, the immigrants are too much in the United States, or stop coming, or you gotta go back. Those are the point. Probably you heard those boys too, right? Mm-hmm. So what is the good answer for them?
The immigrants have made sure that this country survives and had survived during this pandemic, long before and long after. Our immigrant communities are some of the most essential communities of not just our city, but of our entire country. And so there will always be racism and nativism or xenophobia where people are spewing hate and discrimination at our communities too. But any aspect of our community, any aspect of our country and society, you will always find that it has been our immigrant communities that have held up this city and this country. That has been true and will always be true. And COVID alone has shown that too.
Okay. So as a being immigrants, your parents came from 30 years before from Kerala, India to here. So, but you born here, born and raised in here, so you're American. So, but you from your parents' side, right? From India side. What did you learn from your parents or Indian thing? You know what I mean? From your parents?
Well, it's, I always feel so fortunate. Growing up as a child, I would always go back every 3 years to India too. My grandparents were there. My cousins and family were there too. And I maintained such strong. We travel, throughout and visit them as well. It's so important. And back then as a kid, I didn't appreciate it as much. But now I do. You have to keep that culture with you always. No matter when my parents came here, as for any other immigrant too, it's home for them is 10,000 miles away. And for me, you always carry, I've been fortunate, yes, growing up in this country, but also having the culture of our homeland and what home means is broader than just growing up here. It encompasses my Indian culture too, which I'm proud of and have learned so much about over the years. My parents, that stays with you. My kids now learn it as well. And I see, like I just mentioned recently, I was at a Losar celebration with children who opened up a celebration too. And it reminded me of how I grew up as well. And you want to make sure you're always connected to your culture, to your people. It only makes you that much more informed and passionate about these issues when you always remember where you came from.
So what are the things you must love from your parents' country? I would say your parents' country from India. What are the most things you love?
That's a hard question because so many things, from the stories growing up, from the mythology, the history, to of course the food, the music. I still always listen to Hindi music and Bhangra and everything else too when I'm doing my work too. The food of course too. It's impossible to capture everything because it's such a part of who I am, my identity too, is to think about who I am and my family and our roots too. It's deeply integrated literally into the DNA of who I am.
Okay, so for this 2 years term, right? 2 years time, what is your priority? 1, 2, 3, 4 priority work I have to do. I must have to do these things. What did you do so far, right? And then I must have to do. These are my priority number, 2 or 3 number for within 2 years.
Sure.
What are they?
Well, so one of my biggest priorities is to make sure that our South Asian, our immigrant communities, have the resources that we need coming out of this pandemic. There were so many who sacrificed so much for our city, but they were excluded from every form of government relief during the pandemic. And I don't want to see that happen ever again. And so at the city and state level, I was just at a rally before our last city council meeting, calling on the state government to make sure that it filled the excluded worker fund again, to make sure that no undocumented workers are excluded from government relief. That's important to me, is to fight for immigrant communities. 2 is to fight for Elmhurst Hospital, to make sure we get more resources for our public hospital that's right here too. I also want to fight as a public school parent myself too. We need more funding for our schools. We need to make sure that the schools of our district are getting the support and resources we need to. And so I'm always going to be a fighter for our public schools. And finally, I'm the chair of the Committee of Parks in the council. So one of the things I've been doing is really making sure that people understand how critical it is that we get more park space for our community. The commissioners of the city government were here. The mayor came to see our parks too. And for me, I want to make sure that we are expanding park space and green space in neighborhoods like ours, because it is as much an issue of parks as it is an issue of public health and climate justice to have more green space. So those are the things that I've been focusing on and will continue to focus on.
Oh yeah, this area is being so crowded, like a lot of population. That's so that they're really important as well.
We need a green space.
Yeah, and I always ask these questions to every leader, whoever I call them. So what makes a good political leader?
Someone who listens carefully to the communities that they serve, and lets those communities lead the way. Too oftentimes we've had individuals in government who make decisions for a community, impose it on them, and that's why our voices have never been heard. But I think it requires being someone who's really rooted in our neighborhood, who knows to listen to the voices of those who are often least heard in government, and knows to let them decide these are the issues that are important, and then you as elected officials say, well, I'm going to fight for those things. That's, I think, the most important part of leadership.
All right, good answer. Glad to know that as well. And we're almost last minute, so a lot of people, a lot of public, a lot of people, they open their mouth behind a politician or a leader. You know what I mean? They say they have to lot of things say. You know what I mean? So good or bad. So what is your best answer for them? They talk you good and bad or something.
You have to just keep doing what you know and believe is right, and the work that you've done before. Like as for me, example as a civil rights lawyer fighting for our communities. The voices of those who are often least heard by government are the ones that are the ones that influencing me and I care most deeply about too. And if I feel like in my heart I'm listening and doing right by them and doing what I believe is right, you have to keep pushing forward. There are always going to be those who disagree, who criticize. That's part of it too. But you have to ultimately feel from within you that you're truly listening to those who have never been heard and fighting for what is right, and you keep forging ahead. If it wasn't right, the second there are those who aren't criticizing, that's an issue. And when you do something where you want to fight for what's right, when you want to push things forward, you're always going to have critics and opposition.
Awesome. Yeah, I like your spirit. And then, where's your parents now?
So they're just outside in New Jersey, and they come in all the time too. And they, I feel so thankful because they have such a close relationship with my children as well. And so this campaign and even all that I've done wouldn't have been possible without their support. They would come, they'd take care of the kids, their kids would stay with them too. And for them, I think they're so proud to know that I'm here in this position. Also, of course, nervous too. For our communities, going into politics is a very big step as well. And they want to make sure they're once parents, always parents, right? So they're always making sure, telling me,
exactly,
you have to balance between the work that you do in politics and making sure that you're there for your kids as well. And that's something I take very seriously too.
Of course, yeah. I was trying to that point as well. Finally, deliver a beautiful message to your parents from your heart through our public media.
Well, I would say to Amma and Appa, or my parents, that I am so filled, my heart is so filled with gratitude for all they have done that's brought me to this point. I stand on their shoulders and the shoulders of so many other generation who sacrificed so much for us to be here. And I never forget that. I never take it for granted. And in fact, as I get older and have my own children now too, it even stays with me even more how much they made possible my life, my existence, my work in this country. And they're always their spirit is always part of everything that I do.
Awesome. Yeah, we're almost done, and we'll keep continue. We're really proud of you. You know, you elected our council member, District 35, because you, as a parent, so you take care to our everything.
Absolutely.
Us, you know, we're really proud of that as well, and we look forward, keep supporting, you know, and then look forward from you again, and
Absolutely.
then in future, you know, we're trying to. I'm saying every clients, you know, every people after we finish complete our 100 episode, we're gonna, you know, again our season 2, you know.
Yes,
start
absolutely.
So,
that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's a great, it's a really feel pleasure to have you up here, and then look forward to see you again in future next time as well.
Anytime. Let me know when I can come. I'm always very happy to come sit down and talk with you too.
All right.
And support
Thank you so much for your
too.
time,
So
sir.
thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. उहाँ हुनुहुन्थ्यो सिटी काउन्सिल मेम्बर ज्याक्सन हाइट र हाम्रो एल्मस्ट एरिया रिप्रेजेन्ट गर्नुहुन्छ। उहाँले विभिन्न कुराहरू हस्पिटलको विषयमा, पार्कहरू अलि ठुलो बनाउने, हैन, जनसङ्ख्या बढ्दैछ, हस्पिटलमा हामी जस्तो लेभलको मान्छेहरूलाई चाहिँ सुविधा हुनु पर्यो, हैन, हामी जस्तो इमिग्रेन्ट्सहरूलाई चाहिँ धेरै कुरामा सरसहयोग गर्ने ठाउँ छ र म गर्छु भन्ने बाचा गर्नुभएको छ। यहाँहरूले सुनिसक्नुभयो होला। त्यसले गर्दाखेरि आजको लागि भने यो हाम्रो सेटमा क्यामेरामा सम्राट कार्की, निर्देशक किशोर सुब्बा र सहनिर्देशक टोमा लामाको साथमा म प्रस्तुता सुमन थामसँग लिम्बू बिदा चाहन्छु। नमस्ते।
हेलो, नमस्ते, म किशोर सुब्बा, हेलो अमेरिकाको निर्देशक।
हेलो अमेरिका, म टोमा लामा, सहनिर्देशक हेलो अमेरिका।
हेलो अमेरिका, म प्रस्तुता सुमन थामसँग लिम्बू। हेलो अमेरिका, म सम्राट कार्की, cinematographer and editor।
Hello America, hello America, hello America, hello America.